Hello everyone, welcome to Unexplained Encounters. If you're a fan of real horror stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any of our terrifying tales. Today, we have a truly terrifying story to share with you. This is the true story of the Hawaiian Black Stone, a cursed object taken from a sacred volcano. After it was removed, strange occurrences, haunting dreams, and unexplainable events began to happen. What happens when you anger ancient forces and break a long-standing taboo? In this story, we explore the dark consequences of taking something you shouldn't. Let's dive into the terrifying events that followed. In Hawaiian mythology, the goddess Pele is revered as both creator and destroyer. She's the embodiment of the volcano, bringing life and land to Hawaii through her fiery eruptions, but also death and destruction to those who anger her. One of the oldest and most persistent warnings is that no one should ever take anything from Pele's domain, especially the black volcanic stones. These stones are believed to be imbued with her spirit, and removing them from their place is seen as an act of desecration. Over the years, countless tourists have ignored this warning, taking stones as souvenirs, only to find their lives consumed by bad luck, tragedy, and even death. Many have returned these stones in desperation, hoping to reverse the curse. This is not just a legend, it's something that continues to happen every year. David was a man who prided himself on being logical, pragmatic, and entirely dismissive of anything supernatural. So when he and his friends visited Hawaii on a much-needed vacation, the warning from their tour guide seemed more like a joke than a serious threat. "Remember, folks," the guide said, "do not take any stones from the volcano. It is said to bring the wrath of the goddess Pele upon you." David chuckled as his friend Mark gave him a nudge. "You don't believe in that crap, do you?" "No way," David replied, smirking. "It's just a rock." Later that day, as they hiked through the volcanic terrain, David found himself staring at a small, shiny black stone. It seemed ordinary enough, but something about it drew his attention. Ignoring the guide's warning, he pocketed the stone, thinking nothing more of it. But by the time they returned home to Los Angeles, things started to change. A week after returning, David's friend Mark died suddenly. The doctors were baffled. There was no clear cause of death, no prior health issues, just a man who went to sleep and never woke up. The shock of Mark's death weighed heavily on David. But what followed was even more disturbing. That night, David had the first of many nightmares. He found himself walking alone through a vast, desolate volcanic landscape. The air was thick with ash, and the ground beneath him felt hot, as if it might erupt at any moment. In the distance, he saw a figure, an old woman, dressed in what appeared to be ancient Native American clothing. She stood silently, watching him, but her eyes were filled with anger. As David tried to move closer, the ground gave way, and he fell into darkness. When he woke, his heart was pounding. He shook off the dream as nothing more than grief over his friend's death. But the next night, the dream returned more vivid, more terrifying. The nightmares were relentless. Every night, David found himself in that same volcanic wasteland, always watched by the same angry woman. Sometimes, she would get closer, her expression growing more twisted with each passing night. He would wake in a cold sweat, gasping for air, the sensation of being strangled lingering long after he woke. It wasn't long before strange things began happening in his waking life. Electronics malfunctioned around him, lights flickered, and odd, cold drafts would sweep through his house. But the worst was yet to come. One night, while working on a proposal for work, David sat at his desk, typing on his laptop. He had brought his work home, determined to finish the project. But as exhaustion overtook him, he fell asleep at his desk. It was in that vulnerable state that the strange events began. David's laptop screen flickered, random images and symbols flashed across the screen, and a dark shadow appeared behind him. He jolted awake, heart racing, only to find a line of text written on his document. "You die He tried to delete it, but no matter what he did, the words wouldn't disappear. In a panic, he rebooted his computer, and when it restarted, the text was gone, as if it had never been there. But David knew something was terribly wrong. A few days after Mark's death, David decided to meet with Chris and Sarah for dinner. They hadn't seen each other since returning from Hawaii, and Mark's sudden passing weighed heavily on them all. "I just can't believe he's gone," Chris said, pushing his food around his plate without really eating. "I mean, he was in perfect health, no warning signs, nothing." Sarah nodded, her face pale. "It doesn't make any sense. I keep thinking there must have been something we missed, some symptom or condition." David sat silently, staring into his glass of water. He had wanted to tell them about the stone, about the nightmares, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. What if they thought he was crazy? But the weight of the secret was suffocating him. "I've been having these strange dreams," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chris and Sarah both looked up, their expressions concerned. "Dreams?" Sarah asked. "What kind of dreams?" David hesitated, then described the volcanic wasteland, the old woman, and the terrifying sensation of being watched. As he spoke, Chris's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "You're just grieving, man," Chris said, trying to be comforting. "It's normal to have weird dreams after something like this." Sarah didn't look so sure. "Do you think it has something to do with that stone?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. David's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't told anyone about the stone, but somehow Sarah had guessed. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Sarah glanced at Chris before continuing. "I don't know. It's just, ever since we got back, I've felt different, like something followed us home." Chris scoffed. "Come on, Sarah. You don't really believe in that peel stuff, do you?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know what I believe, but something's not right." David remained silent, his mind racing. Maybe Sarah was onto something. Maybe the stone had cursed all of them. A few weeks later, David noticed a persistent dripping sound coming from his bedroom ceiling. At first, he thought it might be a small leak, nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But as the days passed, the leak grew worse, and soon dark stains began to appear on the ceiling. "What the hell?" David muttered to himself, standing on his bed, staring at the expanding black spots. The ceiling wasn't just leaking water, it was seeping something far more disturbing. The liquid was thick, almost like oil, and it left behind an eerie, blackened residue. David ran his fingers across the stain, pulling them back quickly when he realized the liquid had a foul, almost sulfurous smell. It wasn't just water, it was something else. As the days went on, the black stains began to spread across the ceiling, forming a strange, unsettling pattern. It looked almost like a twisted face, leering down at him from above. The sight of it made his skin crawl. David couldn't stand it any longer. He called a contractor, who inspected the leak and offered no explanation for it. "This house isn't that old," the contractor said, scratching his head. "I don't know why you'd have this kind of problem." David spent a significant amount of money to have the ceiling repaired. But even after the repairs were complete, he couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had caused the leak. The house wasn't old, and there had been no signs of wear before. Yet the ceiling had seemingly decayed overnight, leaving behind an image that haunted him long after it was fixed. Despite the ceiling repairs, David's nightmares only grew more vivid. One night, he dreamed of lying in his bed, staring up at the ceiling. The black stains had returned, spreading across the ceiling like ink in water. This time, the stains began to drip down, forming pools of darkness on the floor. As he watched in horror, the black liquid began to rise from the floor, taking the shape of a figure, a shadowy being with no discernible features, but a presence that radiated malice. The shadow moved closer to the bed, its form shifting and twisting as it approached. David tried to scream, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed, frozen in place as the figure leaned over him, its face mere inches from his own. It whispered something in a language he couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear: "You are not safe." David woke up gasping for breath, his heart racing. His sheets were soaked with sweat, and the air in the room felt heavy, oppressive. The dream had been so real, so vivid, that he half expected to see the black stains reappear on the ceiling. The next day, David tried to rationalize the dream, but a growing part of him believed it was connected to the stone. The leak, the nightmares, the strange occurrences around his house, everything seemed to trace back to that moment in Hawaii, when he had pocketed the stone. Determined to find a solution, David spent hours researching Peel's curse and the mysterious black stones. He found countless stories from tourists who had experienced similar misfortunes: broken marriages, financial ruin, illness, all of which they attributed to the stones they had taken. But as David dug deeper, he came across something even more unsettling. Some historians believed that the curse was not just Peel's wrath, but was also connected to an ancient Native American tribe that had once inhabited the islands before the arrival of Polynesians. According to legend, a powerful Native American priestess had placed her spirit into the black volcanic stones after a tragic battle, vowing to protect the land from any who sought to desecrate it. The more David read, the more he felt the weight of the curse bearing down on him. It wasn't just Peel's anger he had stirred, it was something far older and far darker. After learning more about the curse, David decided it was time to return to Hawaii and fix what he had done. He contacted Halia, the local Hawaiian woman who had experience with such curses, and arranged to meet her at the base of the volcano where he had first taken the stone. When he arrived, Halia was already there, waiting for him. Her expression was serious, almost grim. "You're sure about this?" Halia asked, her eyes narrowing. "Once we start the ritual, there's no going back." David swallowed hard, nodding. "I don't have a choice. My life's been falling apart ever since I took that stone. I need to fix this." Halia didn't reply immediately. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she spoke. "This is not just about appeasing Peel. There are other forces at play, older ones. If you truly want to be free, you must apologize to all of them." David frowned. "What do you mean, other forces?" Halia sighed. "The spirits of this land are not only Hawaiian. There were others here before, guarding this land long before Peel's arrival. Their anger can be just as dangerous." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What do I need to do?" Halia took a deep breath. "You need to return the stone, and then we'll perform a ceremony. But even then, there's no guarantee they'll forgive you." The hike up the volcano was grueling, both physically and mentally. David felt the weight of the black stone in his pocket grow heavier with each step, as if it were pulling him back. The air was thick and oppressive, the sky dark with storm clouds. It felt as though the very land itself was rebelling against him. When they finally reached the spot where David had taken the stone, Halia lit a ceremonial torch and began chanting in Hawaiian. The wind picked up, howling through the rocky terrain, and the flames of the torch flickered violently. David knelt down, trembling as he pulled the stone from his pocket. As soon as his fingers touched the ground, a cold gust of wind swept over him, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard a whisper, something ancient and unintelligible. He placed the stone back where he had found it, his hands shaking. Halia continued her chant, her voice growing louder as the wind intensified. David felt as though the earth beneath him was shifting, moving in response to the ceremony. Just as the ritual reached its peak, David saw something out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing on the ridge above them. It was the same woman from his dreams, the one who had haunted him for weeks. She stood motionless, watching him with cold, unblinking eyes. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. Halia finished the chant and turned to David. "It's done," she said. "But remember, this is only the beginning. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." David nodded, but the fear that gripped his heart was far from gone. As he stood up, his legs felt weak, and the oppressive weight of the atmosphere made it hard to breathe. The woman's appearance, so cold and blinking eyes, had unsettled him to his core. "Is it really over?" David asked, his voice shaky. Halia studied him for a moment before responding, her voice low and somber. "In some ways, yes. But remember, not all spirits are as forgiving as Peel. You've set things in motion, David. Whether you can fully escape their wrath, only time will tell." David's stomach churned at her words. There was no reassurance, no promise that he would be free of the curse. He couldn't shake the image of the woman from his dreams. Her presence felt too real, too close. As they descended the volcano, David remained silent, his mind spinning with uncertainty and fear. He had done everything Halia had told him, but the cold, gnawing dread still lingered. Back in Los Angeles, life slowly started to resemble something closer to normal. The nightmares that had once plagued David every night stopped, and the eerie occurrences around his home, flickering lights, malfunctioning electronics, ceased. The strange, dark stains on his ceiling were gone for good after the repairs. For the first time in weeks, David could breathe again. His work started to improve as well. He managed to close a significant deal that he had thought was doomed, and even his colleagues noticed the shift in his demeanor. "You seem a lot better, man," Chris said one afternoon over lunch. "Like you've finally shaken off whatever was weighing you down." David smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think things are finally turning around." He wanted to believe it. He wanted to think that the nightmare was over, that the curse had been lifted and the spirits had forgiven him. But there was a small, nagging doubt in the back of his mind, a voice that whispered in the quiet moments when he was alone. That voice grew louder one crisp morning when David found a small package on his doorstep. There was no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of unease settling over him as he picked it up. He carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. For several minutes, he just stared at it, his gut twisting with a familiar sense of dread. Something was wrong. Finally, he tore the package open and his heart nearly stopped. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was the very same black stone he had returned to the volcano. David stumbled back, the room spinning around him. His throat tightened, and a cold sweat broke out across his skin. He could barely breathe. The stone stared back at him, a reminder that he had not escaped the curse. It had followed him home. David's chest heaved as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He had returned the stone. He had performed the ritual. Why was it back? Why couldn't he escape this? Just then, the lights in the house flickered. The temperature in the room plummeted, and an invisible pressure pressed down on him from all sides. His heart raced as his mind screamed for him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Then, he heard it, a low, raspy whisper. "You thought you could escape." David whipped around, his eyes searching the empty room, but there was no one there. The Mark's voice seemed to echo from the walls themselves, surrounding him. "You thought you could escape." The words reverberated in his mind, and suddenly, he felt a hand around his throat, squeezing tighter and tighter. He gasped for air, clawing at his neck, but there was nothing to grab, nothing to fight against. The pressure mounted, his vision blurring, as he stumbled backward, crashing into the counter. The black stone sat on the counter, unmoving, as though mocking him. David's legs gave out beneath him, and he fell to the floor, his vision darkening around the edges. The last thing he heard before everything went black was that Mark's voice whispering, "You can never escape." Thank you all for watching today's story. Do you believe in Peel's curse? Would you take a stone from the Hawaiian volcanoes after hearing this tale? Or would you heed the ancient warning? If this story gave you chills, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Unexplained Encounters. We'll continue bringing you more spine-chilling, real-life horror stories. And if you thought this story was terrifying, Just wait until you hear about the next encounter, the Stone of Destiny from Scotland. This ancient artifact has been the center of power, mystery, and a dark curse for centuries. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the chilling story of its deadly secret. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what you touch.